So much for joining me this morning, Andrew. Let's start. You're here to talk about the budget, but let's start with the ongoing situation with Storm Dara at the moment. You know, RCT's been hit pretty hard. 2 weeks after Storm Bernd, what's the situation on the ground?
So generally across Wales, the leaders I've been speaking to again this morning, I think it's the wind damage in particular, hundreds and probably thousands of trees down. In my own county, we got hundreds of trees down, so we've had an awful lot of response from contractors and our own teams have worked extraordinary hours over the last few days, a huge amount of preparation. Luckily, we didn't get the severe rain that was suggested. A major operation was put in place on Friday into Saturday, but thankfully we haven't had river flooding on the same scale as we had a couple of weeks ago.
And the impact of those trees coming down, people without power, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so yesterday in my own county we had thousands of people without power. The trees have come down. I've seen some photos of crushed vehicles, buildings damaged. Some of our schools have had roofs damaged and public and private businesses impacted. So there's a lot of work going on. What we've asked people is to try and avoid travel if they can, just for today again, in terms of clearing highways, but all our parks, cemeteries. People just need to be mindful wherever they are in Wales. If they're out and about today, just be really mindful about trees because they might not be down, but they may have been weakened and branches could still fall for the next few days.
And one particular, we've heard a lot about sinkholes this week. There's one that's appeared in Gilfach Goch, isn't it? Underneath the house of an elderly woman.
Yes, so we were made aware. I've seen the photos late on Friday. Our officers attended with emergency services. That person has been put into temporary accommodation. Hopefully the situation is improving.
And is that a widespread concern for people?
I think the biggest issue is that the volumes of water we are seeing coming through culverts when we have these really intense bursts of rain is meaning in some cases these culverts in private gardens like this one is, you know, they may be 100 years old, they fail in, and then when erosion starts, that's where these big sinkholes open. So if climate change and these storms are going to be the new way forward, we will need to consider about the impact on people.
Okay, you're here to talk about the budget mainly. We heard in Rhodri's package just now about concerns that money being handed over to local authorities for the real living wage, because it isn't ring-fenced, isn't reaching the providers. Is there an appetite within local government to ring-fence that money?
Our biggest priority is to make sure the real living wage is paid.
Yeah.
I'm pleased.
At the moment it's not, is it?
Well, I wouldn't say that's... I'm not aware of the exact examples, but what I would say is local authorities all signed up to this in Wales. My own local authority is an accredited real living wage employer, which means we also, through our third sector and other partners, we push this. Funding has been made available from Welsh Government, but of course, as the real living wage goes up, there is more and more financial pressures on local authorities. But we are keen, especially when you consider we introduced this with Welsh Government around social care. One of the ways we have to tackle social care is to make sure that people are paid a decent wage, and that means that more funding is going to be needed for that area.
We've had a glimpse of what's coming up in the Welsh budget already, in that we know that £120 million is going to local authorities. How important is that money? Are you happy with that settlement?
Well, the £120 million is for this financial year. That's to help us with the new pressures. That's until the end of March, which is really welcomed. We've been speaking with Welsh Government for a little while. Ministers have been listening to the plight. We need more money. For example, there's £10 million in there from the Finance Minister and the Health Minister to help us with social care pressures this winter. There's money for schools. There's help with pay pressures, teachers' pay pressures, but also wider pay pressures. So this is literally a shot in the arm right now for local government for this financial year. But the main focus on our discussions now are obviously on the budget for next financial year, and we'll have further details on that next week.
Yeah, give us a little bit more detail on those pressures. Schools, for example, how difficult is it at the moment?
Well, schools certainly, I think as everybody agrees, schools are under pressure across the board. So we are certainly saying there needs to be more funding for the education system.
At the moment, are kind of pupils suffering? Is their education weakened because of these budgetary pressures?
Well, after COVID, an awful lot of schools built up big reserves, but in fairness to head teachers and those teams leading the schools, they've been using some of the reserves each year, so the reserves in the schools have been going back down and are now much closer to what they were pre the pandemic period. So that has been able to help in many cases with schools. But yes, pay pressures and inflation, energy costs hitting schools, so that has been a real pressure. So I think additional funding for schools is welcomed. The big one, as I've already mentioned, social care. We are in conversations with Welsh Government around, you won't fix the NHS unless social care is also working well.
Yeah, what do you make of this conflict? I guess it's the real priority, isn't it, for Ellen Ed Morgan's new government? But it doesn't seem that social care hasn't had as much of a focus. You know, that must be quite frustrating when you're the ones delivering that on the front line, and it kind of, you know, as you say, it's impossible to fix the NHS without fixing social care.
Yeah, we get in the past now that I suppose the position is the growing pressures on social care. So while we've had reasonable amount of support from the Welsh Government in terms of finances, part of the discussion, and in fairness, really constructive conversations with Mark Rayford, Lynn Morgan, Jeremy Miles around the social care and the NHS and how closely they have to work together. That's why £10 million has just been announced now to help with getting people out of hospital this winter so that it doesn't impact on planned care, etc. But what we need to just work on more is about, we do a huge amount of work in local government to keep people out of hospital. Probably 10% of our work is actually getting people out of hospital, back home and reablement. The majority of social care is actually about supporting people in their own homes to live independently. So that has been a real focus for us in the Welsh Government, and that's where the conversations are now focusing.
But do you feel that the money you've had for this year and the money you're hoping to get for next year, will that be enough? Will that improve things, or will they just keep the status quo?
At the very least, we hope we'll maintain a status quo. After 10, 14 years of cuts and austerity we faced, when I first became council leader 10 years ago, we had a 4% cut in our budget. If next week we end up with a 4-5% increase in our budget, well, you can see the stark difference. But it won't reverse, I don't think, some of the difficult decisions we've had to make. But I hope that at least people will see we will get funded for those priorities. Now we've got to fix our roads, we've got infrastructure issues, we've got to improve transport, we've got to improve schools, social care. There's lots of areas local authorities want to invest. And of course, it is a balance between all the pressures Welsh Government have and what money they then can give to us.
And have you had clarity from UK Government colleagues or Welsh Government colleagues in terms of national insurance contributions, any relief that local authorities might have on that?
We haven't had the full detail, but we're aware there will be an allocation of additional funding to Welsh Government. Welsh Government then have been talking to us around an additional amount of money outside of the settlement, around covering our pressures we will face with the changes in social care. No doubt there will be some costs to us in local government from third sector and other independent sectors who provide support and commission services to local authorities, so that will be a cost to us, no doubt. But that's why we're having those discussions as well as part of the budget settlement, because ultimately the vast majority of what money local government spends comes from Welsh Government.
Andrew Morgan, you will no doubt be keeping a close eye on Tuesday on what Mark Drakeford has to say. Thank you so much for coming in to us this morning on, I'm sure, what's a very busy weekend.